Darlene Derbigny, and she has relatives that grew up that is associated with the drive. And so, Darlene, you want to take over?
Okay.
Welcome. Let's welcome.
Thank you, Rob. My name is Darlene Derbigny, and I live in La Junta. And before I start, I just want to take a little brief survey. How many of you believe that my great-grandmother was an enslaved person in this country? Great-grandmother, yes. That's pretty good. Most people would just shake their head and say, that couldn't be. You know, in this day and age, when people think that slavery didn't exist for some people, or that it happened so long ago that we don't need to teach it anymore. My great-grandmother was an enslaved person in this country. How many of you have heard my cousin, Alice McDonald, speak before? Okay. For some of you, this may be redundant.
That's okay.
Oh.
Oh, it'll be great.
So interesting.
Okay, all right. Just wanted to let you know. There is a big difference. Alice is 10 years older than I am. She and I are first cousins. Her father and my father were brothers. The interesting part about that is when Alice's father, when my father was born, Alice's father was already 21 years old.
Wow. He was how old? 21.
21. So there was a big span. My grandmother had a lot of kids. So anyway, we'll start out where it started. Lewis Sadler Craig, born August 12, 1868 in Platte County, Missouri. And she lived to be 104. She died September 1972, right here in Man's Nose. She was 104 years old. She was married to my grandpa, Sanford Gustav Craig, that I never met. I never knew. Because he died in 1941, and I was born in 1944. So it was funny. Rob asked me if I would come and speak. He had written something out saying that I lived on the drive. I never lived on the drive. But I spent a lot of time at the drive. And the reason we spent so much time at the drive is because every weekend, that's where we went. You know, there's that commercial on TV that says, one of these days you'll know that going to your grandmother's house is not vacation. Well, for us, it was. I was a kid. I was having fun. I was happy. The idea of we're going to go to grandma's house was fabulous. And of course, going to grandma's house involved going to see, you know, Aunt Roland lived down the road a mile, Aunt Viola lived down the other road a mile, and Aunt Hattie was there, and she was going to cook this huge Sunday feast for us. So yeah, for me, that was good. Okay, so this was in Platte County. And then, of course, you know, we had the Emancipation Proclamation, Civil War was over, et cetera, et cetera. And blacks wanted to get out of the South. They wanted to get out of the South for economic reasons, for one, security, another, vigilantes. Some people still hadn't accepted the war was over. And they needed land. They needed someplace to live. And they were motivated, spiritually, they were motivated. The Homestead Act came in 1862, where you could get 160 acres, live on it for 5 years, and then it was yours. So there was a guy named Pap Singleton, who was recruiting people to come west, go west, go west. And so they heard about him, and they ended up becoming part of the Exodus. They called it the Exodus because it was akin, the nexus to the Israelites leaving slavery in Egypt. They were exiting slavery and going someplace else. So they call them exodusters even today. So they moved to Kansas when my grandmother was, in 1872, she was just 4 years old. They started the trip. They came in a covered wagon. And they didn't have much. Some people had even less than that. So, but they didn't arrive in Nicodemus until 1879. So that's a long trip. And I kept, I was wondering, what hardships they must have had just on that trip alone. When they had to cross the rivers and waters, sometimes they didn't want to live blacks. They didn't want to transport them across water. So you got to find a way, right? Nicodemus was by no means the only black settlement in the West. There were others, but Nicodemus is the only remaining one. It's still standing. And not only is it still standing, but it's a National Historic Site. And every year, the last week of July, there's a huge family reunion. And I've been back a couple of times. And of course, I love it. It's very exciting. And it's for everybody, though. You don't have to be a family member to go. You could just go, for the historical benefit. Okay, so they arrived in Nicodemus, and blacks, of course, didn't have access to education, but Lula did go to school. And she even went to school with George Washington Carver. I'm sure many of you are familiar with George Washington Carver, the scientist who did research with peanuts and nutrition and farming and so forth. She even graduated from the State Teachers College in Emporia, Kansas. She served in 1914, served on the Nicodemus Election Board, which was rare for women at that time. And then finally, in 1915, they moved to Colorado. Even the time in Nicodemus was very disappointing. They were eager to leave and excited, but then when they got there, they couldn't see anything. They looked around and they said, well, there are no buildings or anything. The only thing they saw were like smokestacks coming out of the ground because the people were living in dugouts. That's all they had. And some people stayed, some people didn't, some people could rough it and others didn't want to or couldn't or whatever. So there were poor conditions in Nicodemus, for sure. But they ended up leaving Nicodemus, trying to find a better place, and that's how they ended up in Manzanilla. So the Craigs were the part of the first 100 people, Black Americans, to settle near Manzanilla. My grandmother, Lula, her name is spelled L-U-L-U, but they call her Lula. So she taught in a one-room school. She was active in church, of course. She was a community leader, and she started the Literary Society. So the blacks also, of course, didn't have churches to go to. It's interesting, they like to say that the slave owners were good, and look how good we are, we took our slaves to church, but they only taught that part of the Bible that benefited the slave owner. At any rate, they ended up starting churches. There's a church in Lahaina that they started, the AME Chapel, which stands for African Methodist Episcopal Church. Looks like they tried to get all the churches into one because they wanted everybody to have some place to go to church. And they also had a Baptist church. And while they were, I'm going back and forth, but while they were in Nicodemus, it was hard. They didn't have food to eat. Where were they going to get food? They couldn't plant or whatever. And if it weren't for the Native Americans, there was more than one tribe, but one tribe they mentioned as the Osage tribe brought food and gave it to them because they knew their situation. They knew that they didn't have food. So my grandmother did write a book. She liked to take notes. She kept journals. And this is a book that was written by Brenner, but it's based on my grandmother's notes. And it's a true story. It's listed as fiction inside, but it actually is a true story based on facts. And it's still for sale. And it's called Wagon Wheels. very interesting. Get a lot of historical insight there too. So, and when we have the celebration, the end of July, it's usually 4 days, the last 4 days of July. Sometimes there are Indians who will come back and speak and talk about their history and their time. They reminisce too. My grandmother had a lot of children. Most of them, if they were not sick or didn't die in their youth, had long lives. They had longevity. Okay. And one of her daughters, May Crow, became an ordained minister and actually was a minister in the Herbert Chapel AME Church. It's still on the corner there in La Junta. I know you've all passed it, but it's like, it's been trashed now. At one time it was a beautiful building.
It's a corner.
It's on 2nd Street and the Bell Bombings on 2nd Street, Rivera.
Across from the Bell Bottom.
Smithland? Okay, 2nd Smithland. Yeah, that's where it is. Okay. Like I said, a lot of people couldn't take it in Nicodemus, and some of them couldn't take it even after they got to Colorado. After the Depression, a lot of them left. But there was a big community at the Drive. I mean, I can't tell you the number of people. At one point, I think they said there were about, 200 or 300 people living there. It was a big community. A lot of them were my relatives, but not all of them. And I'm sure it was rough living. And like I said, I was a kid, so I didn't see that. When I would go there, it would just be fun and games. Going to my grandmother's house was like going to Disneyland. You know how you go to Disneyland, you go to the turnstile and say, okay, let's have fun. And that was what I was doing. And we could play and romp, and nobody ever got hurt. I don't remember anybody ever getting hurt. This is my second cousin sitting over here. She's laughing and nodding her head because she spent a lot of time at the Drive, probably more than I did, but I was counting the days. So one of the things I remember when I go to my grandmother's house was she had a stereo scope, one of those things that you hold up, you know what it is, and you put the two pictures in, and that was so exciting. She had an organ, the pump organ, you pump the pedals and you pull the knobs out. And that before when I came, I was looking at a lot of things around here. She had a lot of these items in her house because that's what everybody was using to grind their meat, to make the butter. I can actually remember the smells of going into my grandmother's house. The milk, they made their own butter. The way the butter tasted, it was so good. The homemade bread, I can still smell it. Homemade bread and homemade butter. Is there anything better than that? No. Nothing better than that. And they also had this huge, I don't know the dimensions, but it was like an old black stove that had everything on it. It had a reservoir for water, and you could heat your iron on there, and you could put your pots and pans in there, and I'm sure Warren knows the kind of stuff I'm talking about. So that was pretty interesting too. Her writings are still preserved in Graham County, History of Nicodemus, Kansas, and at the University of Kansas. There was a movie made which celebrated her 102nd birthday called Happy Birthday, Mrs. Craig, that was put out by the Harry Belafonte Enterprises. And that was a big celebration. That was August 12th, 1970. And you can still see the film. It's still, you can get it online. But going back to the Drive, I was the city cousin. I was his country cousin. So I wasn't that interested in doing chores and all that kind of stuff. I milked the cow. I gathered the eggs. I mean, I did that stuff, but that wasn't what I really wanted to do. One of the things I remember at my grandmother's house walking around, she always had nice little sayings on the wall, nice little pictures, and like this one. This is one that Alice had. And it just looks so peaceful and so serene. Sometimes it would have like a little saying or a Bible verse on it. And I remember sometimes just walking through the house and reading all her things. And the way things were in those years, people sat down to eat. You had a tablecloth. You even had real napkins, you know, when you ate your meals. And after your meal, you took your napkin, folded it up, put it back in the ring, left it on the table for the next meal. You know, I remember that. My grandmother told the stories. I was a kid. I didn't know which questions to ask. I would know now. But people did not enjoy being enslaved. It wasn't their choice. It was very hard. And she was inducted into the Blacks in Colorado Hall of Fame in 1973. They had no electricity on the drive. I mean, they had their feather mattresses and pillows and so forth, that I would wait until nobody was around. I'd go in the bedroom and jump up and down in bed. I didn't even get caught. They didn't have running water, and so we did have an outhouse. And I don't know if everybody here, you're a pretty aged group, so you know what a chamber pot is. I remember one year I spoke at the college and I was talking about the chamber pot because I didn't know what the chamber pot was. I just saw it sitting there, you know, and I said, what is that? And it was a very ornate one. It was very pretty, you know, so deceiving, right? And after I had given my talk, one of the college students came over and said, what is a chamber pot? So he learned at least one thing that day. And also, she had a big mulberry tree bush in the backyard. I used to like to climb it, and I was kind of a tomboy, climb it and eat the berries, of course. Oh, I forgot to mention that when they had gone to Nicodemus, there were towns already there in Kansas, but they wouldn't let the blacks into the town. Hill City was kind of like the twin city of Nicodemus. So that was why they built Nicodemus, part of the reason. They were hoping that would be a very successful town, and it would have been had the railroad passed by Nicodemus. But they changed the route, and that was another reason that the city didn't flourish more. Let's see if I missed anything here. I think I got everything I wanted to say. Her sayings. My grandmother was soft-spoken and quiet, and if you met her, I guess you might think she was a pushover, but she wasn't. She had a few sayings that she said, these are good words to live by. And one of them was, do your best. She said anytime somebody would ask her to do something, she thought she could do it, she said, I will do it, and I will do my best. And another one of hers was, we are family. We are one. We are family. A third one that she liked to say was, be informed. Know what's going on. You know, by her chair, she had a magazine rack that had U.S. News and World Reports. She liked to keep up with the news. Be independent. And keep the land. Keep the land. I have a few pictures that I wanted to show you. It's not very many, but a couple of people I wanted to point out. If you see anybody you recognize, let me know.
And you still do own the land, the family does own
The family still owns the land,
Yeah,
yes.
so
Yes.
what she said is good.
Yes. He can make it bigger, I think. Okay, well, while he's trying to make it bigger, this lady here in the back Not the one with the white hair. The one behind her is my grandmother. And the one standing next to her is her husband, Gustav. There you go, that I never met.
Oh, okay.
And this one is her son, Harvey J. You recognize that?
Grandpa, yeah.
Her grandpa. And this one, I'm not sure of, but I think it's either Aunt May or Aunt Viola. Do you know who that one is?
Which one?
This one right here,
With the hat?
with the hat.
Viola Lively?
Yes. No, Viola Mitchell.
Oh,
Viola Mitchell or May Lively. Just from her smile. I can't see the rest of her face, but that smile is so familiar. So I'm sure they're all related, but those are the only ones that I recognize. And this lady is in a lot of pictures, but I don't recognize her. I don't remember her. Do you see anybody else in there that you know?
Is there anybody lower down?
No. No.
You were talking about the gentleman that's kneeling down on the ground?
This one?
That gentleman, yeah?
Yeah, that's Harvey J., her grandpa.
Okay.
Her grandpa, my uncle. Okay, can you go to the next one, please?
what year was that? Do you know?
I'd have to start counting backwards and forwards and dividing and subtracting.
Well, that's Harvey.
Okay, yeah, okay, so that's Harvey J. and Aunt Roland, right? And it looks like she's sitting on cantaloupes. And she's really thrilled and smiling because I think she's gonna drop a cantaloupe on his head.
That's what it looks like.
It looks like it. And the funny thing is, his son looks exactly like him. Exactly. It's amazing, you know, with genes. You know, your DNA doesn't lie. It's a good picture though. They're both smiling. And look at her shoes. Somebody who's an expert in the time frame could probably figure out the years from looking at clothing and so forth. Can we go to the next one, please? Now, this is one of my grandmother that was in the case, but it was black and white.
Our case over there?
Yeah, I think one of them that I have is in one.
So that's the house on the dry.
Yes, that's on the drive. Yeah, by her house.
Okay, so how many houses were out there? 'Cause
Oh my goodness! Like I said, they had 200, 300 people. They had lots. I don't know all the names. There were the Dixons, the Ruckers, the Doe Smith, Mitchell.
You know, you talk about
Buildings?
dugouts, but
Oh no, this is in Colorado. The dugouts were in Kansas.
oh, okay. So this is the drive that's.
This is the
you guys
drive
had
by
structures
Manzanola.
house.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. And was it mostly black folk that lived out there, or were there?
In that community, where a lot of them had come from Nicodemus there and got some of their relatives to come over. Yeah.
So there was no whites there, or Hispanics, or anybody like that.
To my knowledge, not part of that community. They could have been, but not to my knowledge.
Buster Norris said he lived out there.
Buster Norris.
Okay, so you recognize this, right?
Got
Yeah.
you in front.
This is my Aunt Roland and Uncle Harvey. Again, the same two that you saw playing with the cantaloupes. This is, I think, a little later. A few years later. And I think, is that Doe Smith?
Yes.
That's Doe Smith. And who is this one?
I don't know, I'd have to look at Grandma's pictures. 'Cause she
Yeah, I'm not sure who that is. But you can see, remember I told you I collected the eggs? There's the chickens running around. I like collecting the eggs because their chickens were warm.
The little girl is a foster baby.
Foster baby.
She looks like she's holding a bottle of wine.
Pepsi.
It looks like Pepsi to me.
Mm-hmm.
Actually,
Pepsi
you know what our
logo.
children drink. Okay, now this is Hattie and Hattie. I love that outfit that she has on. And this is her mother. This is Lula right there. I don't know who this little girl is. And those are the same two girls that I see in a lot of the pictures, but I don't recognize them. Again, look at their style of their shoes.
Yeah.
And look at her outfit, her dress. I don't know where she was going or where she was coming from, but she looks really nice. That was Hattie Burnett. Was that the last one? I got one more. So Hattie is her daughter. Okay, here we are. And this is Alice. She's just a young girl with her dad, Harvey Craig. Okay. Great,
that's
a
Alice.
great picture. That's Alice.
That's
Yeah,
Alice.
that's a great picture. She's got a big smile and she's happy.
So do you though.
So basically, that's my speech.
So where did you live in town?
Where did I live in La Junta?
You lived in La Junta?
Yes,
And you
I
went
lived
out
in
there?
306 West First Street.
I mean, when you went to the dry, is that where you lived?
Yes,
Okay.
306 West First Street. And you know where that is?
Third and, yeah, the highway.
First Street? 306 West First Street.
Next door to Mr. Rucker.
Do you know what's there now? Think about the address.
Power plant,
Huh?
the power plant.
No, it's that way.
He's right. 306 West First Street is where Safeway is.
I was gonna say, it'd have to be Safeway then.
Yeah, that's where
Ah.
Safeway is. Yeah. And La Junta was pretty segregated at that time. And the blacks kind of lived in one couple areas, and the Chicanos or the Mexican Americans lived across the tracks, New Edition, Wickham Edition, and finally they got rid of that. And that was changed.
So when they moved down there, were they able to actually get 160 acres?
Yes.
So like each family had a homestead?
I don't know that each family had a homestead. I know they have 160 acres out there.
And did they end up farming it then, or?
I think they just farmed enough to provide for their needs. You know, to take care of their families and so forth.
So they didn't really have cash.
Well, I imagine that they sold some things and they worked. They also worked. They had jobs.
Oh, okay,
I mean, because they had to live.
yeah.
But what did they do?
Well,
I mean, did they have to come into like Manzanilla?
what different?
to
I
work,
actually
or-
don't know where they went to work. My grandmother taught. She taught school for a while, but they took jobs, you know, to get money to live on.
But they had to come like into Manzanilla to work?
Or Rocky Ford, or now my parents did live out there for a short time, and then they finally moved into La Junta. But when they had their first couple of kids, they actually lived out there, the same area, just down the road from where I grew up.
So I'm not familiar, like, where it is. How far south of town is it?
You could go straight down Highway 50 until you get to road. What is the road where we turn?
Oh, don't make me lie.
It's the first road when
The
you
road
leave.
where you go
when you're
past the
exiting
Manzanilla
the
Cemetery?
first road, you just turn south.
There's a road to the cemetery.
Yeah, it's that cemetery
Turn south,
road, and you
yeah.
just continue south on that, And so it's between 50 and Highway 10.
And sometimes we would go out Highway 10. Sometimes we would go out Highway 50, but you get there both ways.
Oh, so it's in between 50 and 10.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
Is it recognized on Google?
Oh, I guess if you put in the right info, you might. There are no buildings left, but they were all vandalized and destroyed, unfortunately.
Was there a creek that went near?
I don't know if it was the creek. They had to haul all the water, but I don't remember them talking about a creek.
So it had to be
I used to cut May Kroll's lawn. She lived on Lewis.
Yeah,
Was she part of that?
sure. That was one of her daughters. That was my aunt.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that was one of the pockets where the black sled was on Lewis, that whole street and First Street and down. Yeah. And then beyond that, used to be Skid Row on the other side of the power plant. You remember that?
The kids go to school and.
They had a school. They had a school out there. until
Out
it
there.
closed. Yeah.
Okay.
And then when they closed, then they would.
Was that a problem as far as segregation, were the kids?
I don't know. You know, they had the KKK in Colorado there, just like they do now. They kind of got along. You know, they kind of got along. I never heard of having any real serious problems or anybody being killed. Or I did read about one cross that was burned, but it was burned on a white person's farm, and I can't remember the reason now. I just kind of skipped over that.
How about Howard Allen? Was he him and his family?
They were from Pueblo.
Oh, they were?
Yeah, they were from Pueblo.
And Doc and Viola Lively too?
Um,
He was a drum player.
yeah, I know. He was my mother's brother.
Oh,
He was my mother's brother.
cool.
Well, how many descendants do you think remained around here?
Oh. Today, you mean?
Well, maybe 40 years ago?
A lot, because it seemed like everybody had a pretty big family. Do you have a number? I don't have a number. But there were a lot.
A lot stayed around?
No, they didn't stay here. They
Oh,
left.
that's what I was saying. not-
Oh, how many stayed around?
Yeah.
No, not too many. Very, very few stayed around. They all left.
They're looking for better opportunity.
Well, I guess it seems like, you know, if you go away, or you go away to college, or you go away in the military or whatever, you just kind of don't come back. Few came back. She came back. I came back. I mean, when I graduated college, I wanted to see skyscrapers, and so I moved to New York City. I said I would move wherever I could get a job. And so one of my professors got me a job in New York, so I said, I'll go to New York. And somebody said, well, if you just wanted to see skyscrapers, why don't you go to Denver? And I said, because Denver doesn't have skyscrapers. So, yeah, once you get out in the world, it's a whole different story. Like I said, you know what happens when you go to Disney World? It's exciting. There's a lot of excitement out there.
Is that where you met Arthur?
I did meet Arthur in New York City. I did. We were teaching in the same school.
Hmm.
You want me to tell that story too? You gotta pay extra for that one. I'll tell you though. I'll tell you because you asked. We were both working in an intermediate school in New York City, in the Bronx actually. And it was a big school. I mean, it had 5 stories, and there was no elevator. I taught on the top floor, 5th floor, and he taught on the 2nd floor. So when I would come in the morning, I would walk all the way to the 5th floor, and I would stay up there because I didn't want to have to walk up and down. And I was walking going up the stairs, and I looked down, I could see everybody coming in the morning. And I saw this tall, good looking. And I asked my friend, I said, Adele, who is that man? She said, I don't know, darling, but I'll find out for you. That's how I met. That's basically, I hope that it was beneficial for me. Thank you for
Thank you, Darlene.
You're welcome.
Yeah. About a year ago, well, it was a year ago, but we had her aunt, Alice Craig McDonald come here talk. Huh?
Yeah, my aunt is there.
Yeah, well, Alice Craig McDonald?
Is my cousin.
Because,
She's my first cousin. Her father and my father were brothers.
and so she gave a talk here, and, I mean, this is a different side of the drive that, you know, which I thought was really interesting. So, I think it's great. You're always welcome here.
Was there another discussion going on in Pueblo a couple days ago?
There
The
may
drive?
That is coming up on
Oh,
the
that's coming.
16th.
And who's doing that?
Alice. Our hope is that Alice will be doing that.
Oh, okay.
For the people of Southeast Colorado and the Rocky Ford Museum, I'm Adrian Hart with your Southeast Colorado News.